Couldn't sleep the night my grandson pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand and whispered, "Don't let her see you read it, Grandpa." I waited until I heard his footsteps reach the top of the stairs. Then, I unfolded it under the kitchen table like I was hiding something myself. 7 words in the 9-year-old's handwriting, the letters leaning sideways like they were trying to run off the page. Check inside the old lockbox in the shed. I sat there for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A truck passed on the road outside. I read those 7 words 3 more times and then folded the paper back up and put it in my shirt pocket, right against my chest, where I'd kept my wife Patricia's letters during the 2 years I worked offshore, before we finally got enough saved to buy this house. That was 1987. The house wasn't much then. It's not much now, if I'm being honest. 3 bedrooms, a back porch that lists slightly to the left, a shed I built myself from a kit back in 2003. But it's mine. Patricia and I paid it off 11 years before she passed, and when she did, she left everything to me the way we'd always planned, the way we'd written down, signed, and had witnessed at the kitchen table of our attorney Bernard Ogle on a Tuesday afternoon in February of 2019. Everything to me, then everything to our son Garrett. That was the plan. I don't think it's the plan anymore. Let me back up, because this story doesn't make sense if I start in the middle, which is where my head keeps wanting to jump to. The night in the shed. What I found. What I did with what I found. But before any of that, you need to understand what our life looked like in the 18 months leading up to that night, because that's when things started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. Garrett is 41. He works in logistics, coordinates shipping routes for a regional distributor out of Columbus. Good job, steady. He married Renata 6 years ago, which put us all together at a restaurant in Hilliard for a dinner I thought went fine, though Patricia leaned over in the car afterward and said something I've thought about many times since. She said, "That woman is always calculating something." I told her she was being uncharitable. Patricia said, "I know. I'm going to keep doing it anyway." My wife was a smart woman. Renata is pleasant when she wants to be. She has a smile that arrives a half second after it should, like a light on a timer. She organized our Christmas gatherings with military precision, which I appreciated, and remembered my birthday without being reminded, which I also appreciated. What I didn't appreciate and didn't fully register at the time was how often she steered conversations about the house, about the property value in our neighborhood, about whether I'd ever thought about downsizing, about how hard it must be to keep up the yard alone now that Patricia was gone. She asked me once, about 8 months ago, if I'd ever considered putting the house in a trust. I said I already had arrangements in place. She said she only asked because her cousin was a paralegal and knew how complicated probate could be. I said I appreciated her concern. She smiled that half-second smile and changed the subject to something about Owen's soccer schedule, and I thought nothing more of it. Owen is my grandson. He's 9 years old and has his mother's dark hair and his father's gap-toothed grin and his grandmother's habit of going very still and quiet when he's thinking hard about something. I see Patricia in him more than I see Garrett. That's not a criticism of Garrett. It's just the way it landed. Owen started coming to stay with me more often last fall. Friday nights, sometimes Saturday too. Garrett and Renata said they appreciated the break. I said I was glad to have the company, which was the complete truth. We'd eat frozen pizza and watch whatever game was on, and he'd fall asleep on the couch with his shoes still on, and I'd cover him up and sit there in the quiet for a while, feeling like maybe things weren't so bad. But something shifted around November. Owen got quieter, not in his grandmother's thoughtful way, more like a child who'd learned that certain things aren't safe to say out loud. He'd look at me sometimes across the dinner table in a way that made my chest tighten, like he was trying to tell me something his mouth wouldn't cooperate with. I asked him once if everything was okay at home. He said, "Yeah, Grandpa." I said, "You sure?" He looked at his plate. "Yeah." I didn't push it. Maybe I should have. But I know from raising Garrett that pushing too hard just teaches a kid to build better walls, and Owen was already building. Then came the night he handed me the note. It was a Friday in January. Cold, the kind of Ohio cold that gets personal about it. Garrett dropped him off around 6, came inside for exactly 4 minutes, accepted a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and left. Renata wasn't with him. She had a thing, he said. I didn't ask what thing. Owen and I had dinner. Soup from a can because I hadn't been to the store, and he didn't complain, just ate and asked if we could play cards. We played rummy for an hour, and I let him win twice and didn't let him win the third time because he's old enough to know the difference. Around 8, he said he was tired and went upstairs. 20 minutes later, he came back down in his socks and pajamas and stood in the kitchen doorway. I was washing up. He waited until I turned off the faucet. Then he walked to me, took my hand, pressed the folded paper into it, and said what he said about not letting her see me read it. And then he went back upstairs. I stood at the kitchen sink with that paper in my hand. The water was still dripping. Outside the window, the neighbor's porch light was on. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 30 seconds ago, and nothing would ever be exactly the same again. I have felt that feeling before, twice, once when the doctor used the word malignant, and once when the hospital called at 4 a.m. You know the feeling. The world doesn't shift. You do. I waited an hour before I went to the shed. I told myself I was being careful. Looking back, I think I was scared of what I'd find and needed time to get ready. The shed is at the back of the property, past the garden beds Patricia planted, and I've kept up badly, along the fence line where the old oak drops its branches every storm. I built it with my own hands, which means I know every corner of it, every shelf, every place where the wood doesn't quite meet right. The lockbox has been in there since 2009. It's a fireproof document box, the kind you get at an office supply store, gray metal, combination lock. Patricia and I kept copies of our important documents in there. Insurance policies, the deed, a copy of the will. I hadn't opened it in almost 2 years, since before she died, actually. We moved the originals to Bernard's office and I'd forgotten about the copies. Apparently someone else had not. I pulled the chain on the overhead light and stood there a minute, letting my eyes adjust. Everything looked normal. Garden tools on the left wall, the riding mower. Some boxes of Patricia's things I still haven't been able to go through. The lockbox was on the bottom shelf in the back right corner, behind a plastic bin of Christmas lights. It had been moved. Not far. Maybe 6 inches forward. But I know where I put things, and I know where they should be. And that box was 6 inches forward from where it should have been. I knelt down, which takes longer than it used to, and I picked it up and my stomach dropped. The combination had been reset. I tried my old combination. 1987, the year we bought the house. The year Garrett was born. The numbers that opened every combination lock we owned for 35 years. Nothing. I sat back on my heels on the cold concrete floor of my shed, and I looked at that gray metal box in my hands, and I understood that someone had been in here, had gone through what was inside, and had locked it back up with a combination only they knew. I stayed out there for a while, longer than I should have, given the temperature. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was doing the thing you do when something impossible is happening, which is that you keep trying to find the explanation that makes it not impossible. Maybe I changed the combination and forgot. Maybe Garrett came out here for something and accidentally bumped the reset. Maybe I was misremembering where the box had been. I'm 67 years old, and I am not losing my mind. I know where I put things. I went back inside and I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote down every question I had on a legal pad, which is how I've always thought through problems, from my first days working offshore to the budget spreadsheets I maintained for the union steward position I held for 11 years. You write it down, you look at it, you see what connects. The questions filled a page and a half. The most important one was this: what was in that box that was worth taking? And the second one, right underneath it: what wasn't there anymore? I knew what had been in there. I knew it as well as I knew my own name. The deed. The insurance policies. The copy of the will. The will that left everything to me and then to Garrett. I went upstairs, and I stood outside the room where Owen was sleeping for a minute, listening to him breathe. And then I went to bed, and I stared at the ceiling until 4 a.m. In the morning, I made Owen pancakes, and I didn't say anything about the note or the shed. He watched me carefully across the table the way he'd been doing, and when I caught his eye, he looked relieved, like he'd been waiting to see if I was going to be different now, and was glad I wasn't. I smiled at him. I handed him the syrup. After Garrett picked him up, I called Bernard Ogle. Bernard has been our family attorney since 1998, and he is a careful, quiet man who has seen enough of human nature that almost nothing surprises him. I told him I needed him to pull up our documents and check something. He asked what specifically. I told him I wanted to verify that the will on file was the most recent version, that nothing had been changed or updated without my knowledge. There was a pause. He said, "Raymond, are you concerned someone has tampered with your estate documents?" I said, "I want to make sure everything is in order." Another pause. "I'll check everything today and call you back." He called back at 2 in the afternoon. Everything in his office was intact, untouched. The will was exactly as we'd filed it in February of 2019. But he said something else. He said he'd been contacted 3 months ago by someone inquiring about the process for updating a will on behalf of an elderly relative. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. He hadn't given out any information, but the call had been made. He said, "I didn't get a name. It was a woman." I thanked him and sat with that for a long time. Then I called my daughter-in-law. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I didn't call her to confront her. I didn't call her angry. I called her the way you call someone when you already know the answer, but you need to hear what they do with the question. I asked her how she was. She said, "Fine, busy. Owen had a tournament that weekend." I asked her, conversationally, if she'd ever been out to my shed, looking for anything, garden supplies, tools, whatever. A pause. Just a beat longer than it should have been. She said, "I don't think so. Why?" I said I'd found some things moved around and was wondering if Garrett had been looking for something. She said she'd ask him. She didn't ask him. I know, because I called Garrett an hour later with the same question, same casual tone, and Garrett said he hadn't been in my shed in probably 2 years, didn't even know where I kept the key, and he didn't mention that Renata had called him. She hadn't told him about my call. That told me almost everything I needed to know. The next week, I did 3 things. The first thing, I called a locksmith and had the shed rekeyed. The second thing, I went to a hardware store and bought a small wireless camera, the kind that runs on batteries and connects to your phone. I mounted it inside the shed, aimed at the bottom shelf where the lockbox sat. I moved the lockbox back to where it should have been. I put the bin of Christmas lights back in front of it. The third thing, and this was the hardest, I called Bernard back and asked him to walk me through what it would actually take for someone to contest or alter my will. What documents they'd need, what access, what vulnerabilities existed. Bernard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Raymond, I think you should come in." I went in on a Thursday. I sat in his office with a legal pad full of questions, and we went through everything. Bernard confirmed what I'd feared. Someone who had access to copies of the original documents, the deed, the old will, identifying information, could potentially initiate a fraudulent amendment process. It was difficult, and it would eventually fail, but it could cause significant legal and financial chaos for an estate, especially if the primary beneficiary, meaning me, was presented as cognitively impaired. I thought about Renata's questions over the past 8 months. How hard it must be to keep up the yard alone. Have you ever thought about your memory now that you're getting older? You must get confused sometimes living by yourself. I hadn't given those questions much weight in the moment. I was giving them weight now. Bernard helped me take 3 steps. We updated and re-executed the will with specific language about my current cognitive fitness, witnessed by 2 people who weren't family. We added a durable power of attorney that designated my sister Loretta, not Garrett, as my decision-maker if I were ever incapacitated. And we sent a certified letter to Renata's address, not Garrett's workplace, Renata's address, specifically, noting that any inquiries related to Raymond Caulfield's estate should be directed exclusively to Bernard Ogle's office. I watched her get the letter on my phone through a security camera I put up at my mailbox 3 days prior. She stood at the end of my driveway holding it for a long moment. Then she took out her phone and made a call. I don't know who she called, but she didn't look happy. That was on a Monday. On the following Friday, Owen came for the weekend as usual. He seemed lighter, like something he'd been carrying had been set down somewhere he couldn't quite see. We played cards again. I let him win exactly once. He caught me the third game, trying to sneak an ace back into the deck, and laughed so hard he fell off his chair. And I thought, there he is. There's my boy. After dinner, he was quiet for a minute, and then he said, Grandpa, did you look in the shed? I said, I did. He nodded slowly. Was something wrong in there? I thought about how to answer that. He's 9. He already knew something was wrong, or he wouldn't have written the note. But there's knowing something is wrong, and there's carrying the weight of what specifically is wrong, and that second thing is too heavy for a 9-year-old. I said some things were out of place, but I fixed them. He thought about that. Is everything okay now? Yes, I said. Everything is okay now. Did you tell my dad? I looked at him across the table. He looked back at me with Patricia's eyes, patient and steady. Not yet, I said. I will. When the time is right. He nodded like that was a satisfying answer. Then he said, She goes in your shed sometimes, when you're not home. I saw her from the car once when Dad was dropping something off and you weren't there. She told me not to tell you. I kept my face still. How long ago? Before Christmas. Okay, I said. Thank you for telling me. You did the right thing. He picked up his cards again. I know, he said, in exactly the way 9-year-olds say things like that, without any pride in it, just as a statement of fact. I had to look away for a second. I talked to Garrett 2 weeks later. Not over the phone. In person, at my kitchen table, with coffee. I showed him the legal pad. I showed him the camera footage of the shed door opening in November and December twice. I showed him the correspondence from Bernard. I showed him the letter we'd sent to his home address. And I watched his face as he understood why it had gone there specifically. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, Dad, I didn't know. I believe him. Garrett is not a complicated man, and he's not a dishonest one. He'd been managed the same way I had, just more thoroughly. Renata had made herself the point of contact for anything financial, anything legal, anything involving the house. She'd done it slowly enough that it hadn't felt like anything. He put his head in his hands. I said, I need you to understand that I'm not angry at you, but I need you to understand what was happening. He looked up. His eyes were red. He said, What do I do? I said, That's between you and your marriage. I can't tell you what to do there. What I can tell you is that my affairs are in order now and they'll stay that way, and if anything changes, Bernard will know before anyone else does. He nodded. I said, And Garrett? Owen told me. He saw her at the shed. She told him not to tell me. He went very still. He told me anyway, I said, because he's a good kid, and he was scared, and he trusted me. I let that sit for a moment. He should always be able to trust me, and he should always be able to trust me, and he should always be able to trust you. Garrett didn't say anything. He just sat there looking at the table, but something in his shoulders had changed. Something had settled or maybe broken open. I couldn't tell which, and maybe it was both. I refilled his coffee. We sat for a while longer. Outside the window, the oak tree was dropping branches again. One of these winters I'm going to have it looked at. I've been saying that for 4 years. I've learned something, living to 67 and losing the person I loved most. And watching what happened after. I've learned that old doesn't mean slow, and it doesn't mean soft, and it doesn't mean you can be redirected with a few careful questions about your memory and your yard. I've spent 40 years solving problems. Offshore, in union halls, in hospital waiting rooms, at kitchen tables exactly like this one. I know how to be patient. I know how to read what's not being said. I know how to wait until I have the full picture before I move. What Renata didn't know, what she maybe couldn't have known, is that every skill I have was built for situations exactly like this one. You don't raise a child alone after a difficult divorce and work a physically dangerous job for 20 years and keep a household running and bury your partner and keep going. You don't do all of that and not know how to handle yourself when things go wrong. You just handle it. Owen was back last Friday. He brought a new card game he wanted to teach me, something with complicated rules that he explained very fast and I only partially understood. We played for 2 hours. I lost, legitimately, every single time. He was laughing again, really laughing the way kids do when nothing is shadowing them. I watched him, and I thought about Patricia and what she would have said. I think she would have said she was glad I listened. I think she would have said that sometimes protecting the people you love means being willing to do the slow, unglamorous work of paying attention, of noticing the 6 inches, of taking the notes seriously. I think she would have said Owen was going to be fine. I think she would have been right. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you're sitting, and you've ever felt like someone was quietly moving things around you, reorganizing your life without your permission, making you feel smaller or slower or less capable than you are, pay attention to that feeling. It's not nothing. And you are not nothing. I'm 67 years old, and I built my own shed, and I wired my own cameras, and I sat across from my attorney and asked every question on a 1.5 pages of legal paper, and I protected what matters. You can too. Don't forget to like this video if it meant something to you, and leave a comment. I want to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Some of my favorite moments in this community are seeing how far and wide you all are. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. I've thought a lot about what started all of this. Not the lockbox, not the camera footage, or the certified letter, or the conversation with Bernard. What started it was a 9-year-old boy who was scared and chose to trust me anyway. Owen didn't have to do anything. He could have stayed quiet the way kids learn to stay quiet when the adults around them make silence feel safer than speaking. He could have told himself it wasn't his problem, or that I'd figure it out on my own, or that he didn't really know what he'd seen. Kids that age are good at talking themselves out of things, because the adults in their lives teach them to. We don't mean to, but we do. He wrote the note anyway. And I think about that more than anything else that happened. There's something I've come to believe, not because anyone told me, but because I've watched it play out enough times in my own life to take it seriously. The choices we make in small moments build the person we are in the large ones. Renata didn't wake up one morning and decide to do what she did. She got there through 100 smaller decisions, each one a little easier because the one before it had already been made. A question steered here, a document accessed there, a 9-year-old told to stay quiet. Each step made the next one feel normal. That's how it works, not dramatically, quietly. And it goes the other way, too. Owen didn't become the kind of kid who does the right thing when it's hard because of one big moment. He got there the same way, through small things. The times someone listened to him. The times Garrett or Patricia, in her own way, even after she was gone, showed him that honesty costs something, but it's always worth paying. You don't get that kid without all of those invisible deposits. I think about my own role in this, and I don't let myself off easy. I heard Patricia say that Renata was always calculating something. I told her she was being uncharitable. I missed questions I should have caught. I'm not going to pretend I handled any of this perfectly, because I didn't. The lesson I take from that isn't to feel bad about it. It's to pay better attention, to trust the people who've earned that trust, to write things down and look at them honestly, even when what you're looking at makes you uncomfortable. Intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being willing to ask the question even when you're not sure you want the answer. Courage isn't the absence of fear. I was sitting at that kitchen table at 4 a.m., scared as I've been since the hospital called the morning Patricia died. Courage is just doing the next right thing anyway, and integrity is what you do when no one's watching, which is exactly what Owen did, and exactly what Owen did, and exactly what I hope I did too. I'm 67 years old. I am not slowing down. I am not confused. I am not less capable than I was 20 years ago. I'm differently capable, which is not the same thing. And if you're sitting somewhere watching this, and you're starting to feel like the world is trying to convince you that you're smaller than you are, that you need more help than you do, that your best years are somehow behind you, I want you to hear this clearly. That's not wisdom. That's a story someone else wants you to believe. Pay attention. Keep your own records. Trust the people who have earned it. And never underestimate what a child sees.